All right, good morning. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. Today we will begin a review of CDFM Module 3 out of the 2020 study guide. So as usual, before we begin, this is an opportunity for you to ask any particular burning questions you may have on a topic that you have been reviewing for your study. And maybe you just need some explanations or a better explanation of that topic. So at this time, does anyone have any particular questions before we begin the review? Okay, I don't hear any questions on the phone line, so we'll go ahead and drive on. So ideally, when I do a review, I like to ask questions and for the audience to provide feedback. So if you would like to give feedback as I ask the question, I'll pause for a few minutes to give you an opportunity to give feedback. Because at this point, if it's a review, that means you've gone through the material a number of times, and now you're kind of testing your knowledge of the material. After today's session, you'll have a 2-week break to give you an opportunity to schedule and take the Module 3 exam. You do not want to wait until you complete all 3 modules to take the exam, because a tendency for people to forget what they learned if they've done it in the past. So it's better for you if you learn the material right as you complete the review to go ahead and schedule your exam. Any question of me before we begin? And feedback is welcome, so I know that y'all can hear me on the phone line.
Good morning.
You hear me? All right, awesome. All right, so we're going to start off a little slow, and I'm not going to go in any particular order. I may start off in an order, but I'm going to kind of mix the questions up, because on the exam, it's not going to be broken down into competency areas, or it's not going to tell you which area you're working on, nor is it going to go in any particular order. So the questions, 80 questions will come from different directions. So you kind of have to read the question and figure out what they're asking you. All right, so let's go ahead and I'll start with the knowledge check. So if you have your study guide in front of you, try not to look at the questions and the answers. I'll ask the questions if you would like to give the feedback, and then we'll start off that way. All right, so what are the 3 areas that we must look at for every appropriation? When we look at appropriations, what are the 3 areas we need to review when we're trying to figure out what to use? So you say purpose, time, and amount. Those are the 3 areas for every appropriation. Before we decide to use it, we must determine its purpose, the time frame when we can have new obligations, and the amount that we have available to us. Who can give me some of the budget authority sources? We have several. What are some types of budget authority? So we get budget authority from the appropriations, borrowing authority, contract, monetary credits, offsetting collections and receipts, and loan guarantee. Whenever you have a list, make sure you know the entire list. So if they ask you in an exam, which one is not a source of budget authority, you will know which one does not belong with the responses. Usually you have 4 answers, A, B, C, or D. So if you know what all 6 looks like, then you'll be able to pick out the one that does not belong with that group. Annual appropriations, how long are they good for new obligations? I
O&M
re-
and helpers, 1 year.
O&M and MILPERS are annual appropriations, and they are good for 1 year. See, by answering the way you did, you've already answered 2 questions, right, on the knowledge check. All right, so give me an example of a multi-year appropriation.
Milcon shipbuilding
Milcon shipbuilding,
is 5 years.
5-year appropriation, all right. How about the other 2?
PT&E
RDT&E is 2, and the last one?
procurement.
Procurement, 3-year appropriation. All right, you've got them all out. So anything else is asked outside of that, you'll know what the answer is. All right, all appropriations stay in the expired state for how long?
5 years.
What can you do with these appropriations when they are in the expired state? Can you start a new contract with an appropriation in the expired state? Okay, so what can you do? So you can make, I heard adjustments, right? Upward and downward adjustments. You can take funds away, you can return funds, but you can only make adjustments when that appropriation enters the expired state. And we said when the funds enter the closed state, those funds are returned to the Treasury into the miscellaneous receipts account. However, if we get an invoice on an account that was closed, can we pay that bill? Can we pay that invoice? And if so, what are our limitations? Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. It's 1% using current appropriation use.
That's correct. So you can use up to 1% of current appropriation. It's got to be the same type of appropriation for that closed account to pay for that invoice on an account that was closed. Okay. All right. So we covered all of that. And that's just me going down the knowledge check, and everything that you know about that topic, you need to, at this point, be able to articulate. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution gives the power to which branch of government? The legislative branch. What told you it was a legislative branch? How did you know it was legislative?
Article 1, legislative, 2, executive, 3, judicial.
There you go. Exactly. So even if you don't know what Section 9 is, but you should, because Ms. Thomas says, if you don't know any of them, you better know Article 1, Section 9. But let's say you forgot what Section 9 is. The Article 1 should tell you it's legislative or Congress. Article 2 is executive branch or the president. And Article 3 is the judicial branch or the courts. When we talked about the necessary expense doctrine, what's the 3-part test that they discuss? When you're trying to figure out what appropriation to use and you look at the necessary expense doctrine to test, you have to do this 3-part test to determine if that's the right appropriation. What is the 3-part test? So you have to.
Is there a logical? Does it go along with appropriation? Is there a logical
relationship?
I can't think of what the word is.
Relationship.
Relationship, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so does it bear a logical relationship to what it is that I'm trying to pay for? Does that appropriation bear a logical relationship? What's the other one? The second part of the test, second test. You have to check this.
Not covered under any other appropriation.
Make sure that it's not already funded under another appropriation. And then the final step is that it's not prohibited by law. Because just because you have funding does not mean that you can just automatically buy whatever you want, however you want. We have to look, does it bear a logical relationship? Make sure it's not prohibited by law or it's not funded by another appropriation. What is the name of the Temporary Appropriation Act? What is the common name? Say it again. The Temporary Appropriation Act. What is a Temporary Appropriation Act?
Continuing resolution.
The continuing resolution. So I'm just trying to find different ways to ask you familiar questions, because on the exams, again, it's not going to be straightforward. So I can't ask you directly the way it is there. All right, so now let's see what else we have. And for those who are on my email distro, make sure you check your email. I have some notes that goes into a little bit more details on some of these topics to help you as you study for Module 3. All right, so let's go back to Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. What does it say? Since you need to know it, what does it say? And you can put it in your own words, but that will mean that you understand it. Article 1. No money shall be drawn from the treasury unless or outside of an appropriation, meaning you can't get any money out of the Treasury Department unless we have an appropriation law or a temporary appropriation law. What does GAO stand for? What is the acronym GAO stand for?
Accountability Office.
The Government Accountability Office. Who do they work for? The GAO works for Congress. What is the title of the individual in charge of the GAO?
Controller General.
Comptroller General. What does the GAO do for Congress? What?
Does the checks and balances of spending.
Okay, so they do the checks and balances of spending. So who are they checking?
Executive branch.
There you go, the executive branch. And the reason, how do you know it's the executive branch? Because who does the budget come from? The executive branch has to submit the budget to Congress. The president has to submit the budget to Congress. So once the budget is approved, it's approved for the executive branch. So when the GAO provides oversight, they are providing oversight of the executive branch's budget, if that makes sense. Any question on anything we've covered so far? So you kind of see how one area, one topic can lead to another question. All right, stoplight. What does the GAO Red Book cover? So it deals with appropriation law, right? Make sure you say appropriation, not just budget. So the GAO, if you want additional guidance on appropriations, you can Google, you can look up the GAO Red Book on appropriation law. What is the GAO Yellow Book? As you're thinking of a stoplight, red, yellow, and green. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Auditing, right? As we talked about that last week. So the GAO Yellow Book deals with auditing, and the GAO Green Book deals with internal control. OMB, what does that stand for? Office of Management and Budget. So you know what's my next question?
They work for the executive branch.
They work for the executive branch to do, so they're responsible, the OMB, Office of Management and Budget, is responsible for the budget, for the resource management, the chief financial officer, whatever words you want to use, they're responsible for the executive branch budget. What is, let's see, I don't know if you remember this, but what is the OMB's guidance on the budget formulation, the budget, anything on dealing with the budget? What is the OMB's guidance called?
A11?
Woo, yeah, OMB circular A11. So usually any guidance you get from OMB, it's typically in a circular. So if you remember nothing else, OMB circular. So OMB circular A11 deals with the budget, anything to do with the budget instruction, budget development, formulation, planning, whatever it is, A11. All right, let's go back to the 3 topical areas in appropriation where we talked about purpose, time, and amount. What is the Anti-Deficiency Act chapter guidance on purpose? So if it's an ADA, Anti-Deficiency Act, you know it's covered in 31 US Code. Most people know that. But what paragraph, what section, what chapter covers purpose?
1301.
1301. So what about time? Time is covered in 31 US Code.
1502.
1502, that's chapter 15, paragraph 2, and amount.
1341.
And 1517. So there's 3 for amount. So whenever you say, so if you read a scenario and they ask you which Anti-Deficiency Act have they violated, you have to know, are they violating purpose, time, and amount? 1301, 1502, 1341, 42, and 1517. All right, so purpose and time is pretty straightforward. Amount has 3. So what does 1341 talk about? What am I spending before I receive it? What am I spending in excess of what I received? What am I violating in 31 US Code 1341? Appropriations, correct. What am I violating in 1342?
Voluntary services.
Voluntary services. So all you're doing, keywords, you're pulling out the keyword. And the last one, 1517, what am I violating there? What's the keyword in 1517? Apportionment. Apportionment. So the third one is you're violating apportionment. Who apportions funds? Because we got to know what apportions mean. Apportionment. Who apportions? OMB apportions funds. So how does that work? After Congress appropriates the funding, what are the 2 primary steps that happen immediately after that? So the first, okay, correct. The first legal step is the Treasury issuing the Treasury warrant, because that's legal because it's tied to Article 1, Section 9. So the Treasury issues a Treasury warrant, which is a notification to all of us that we received the appropriation law, the bank account is open. So what is the second set of process that happens once Congress appropriates the funds? So we say that OMB begins the apportionment process. Who can explain how that apportionment process works? Does OMB automatically send funding to the agencies? Exactly. So the agencies, when Congress appropriates, Treasury issues the Treasury warrant, that's one step, and the apportionment process in OMB begins, but it begins when the agencies submit. What is the document they submit? What's the apportionment document? It's the SF 132. So they have to submit within 10 days, they have to submit the SF 132 to Congress, not to Congress, to OMB. And then how long does OMB have to send them their apportionment?
30 days.
30 days. So the agencies, 10 days after the appropriation, within that 10 days, agencies submit the SF 132 to Office of Management and Budget. Then Office of Management and Budget has 30 days to issue apportionment. So if apportionment goes to the Department of Defense, what is the funding call that we receive? All the agencies or the organization that fall under the Department of Defense, what is our budget called when we receive it? So
Allotment.
it's called an allotment, that's correct. So appropriation is done by Congress, OMB apportions, and DOD issues allotment to all the organizations that falls under Department of Defense. What does bona fide need mean? What does the bona fide needs rule mean? As we talk about time, and we know that we operate on the fiscal year from 1 October of one year to 30 September of the following year. So when we receive our appropriation is based on that fiscal year. So what does the bona fide needs rule say? It says that we're supposed to spend current dollars for current needs. Are there exceptions to that rule? So for the most part, everything, all your new obligations ends 30 September. But when you talk about service contract is typically 12 months. That means you're going to cross fiscal years for the most part. So if you have a contract that begins on 1 August and is 12 months, how much of current appropriation do you obligate on that contract? It's a severable service. You want me to repeat the question? If it's one, go ahead.
If it's a severable service, then if you don't need it anymore, you can get rid of it at any time and just pay as you go.
Right, but I need it. It's a 12-month contract and I know I'm gonna need it. And today is 1 August and I'm entering into a contract on 1 August. But it's a 12-month contract. I know I don't have funding for the new fiscal year. How much of current funds do I obligate on that 1-year contract that starts 1 August?
You would all the full amount you're going to be using if you're going to be using it for that year.
Right. So at this point, we have a need, we have a requirement. So we're going to obligate the full amount of the contract using current funds. even though it crosses fiscal year, but because it's a severable service, 12 months or less, I can use current funds to pay for that contract. Let's say the severable service was 13-month contract. How much will I obligate then? Same amount, more, or less?
You do the 12 months and then you do another one for the 1 month, right?
Correct. So your limit is 12 months. So if it's a severable service and they say in the contract it's a 13-month contract, you can only obligate 12 months of current appropriations for that service. And then the other month would say subject to availability of funds. Or if we already have an approved appropriations for the new fiscal year, then you can cite that new fiscal appropriations in that. What if it's a non-severable contract and it's 1 September? How much would I pay for that non-severable contract? Let's say they say it's going to take 6 months to do the contract. Does that make a difference with a non-severable? So the key thing there, it's a non-severable service, means that you have to pay the full amount of that non-severable contract, because you cannot break up the work into parts. You have to do the complete job to get a benefit. So if it's a non-severable, you pay the full amount for that particular contract, regardless of fiscal year. All right, let's say it's 1 September. All right, we're currently in FY22. So let's say it's 1 September and I have a contract that starts 1 October. I already have the new appropriations for FY23. Can I enter into a contract for FY23? Will I have funding?
Yes, because you said that we had a new appropriation already in place.
Correct.
Do that if it's already been approved.
Correct. And the reason I point that out, because a lot of people, for as long as they've been around the government, we've always operated under CRs. But if for those of us who've been around for a longer time, you know, there's some years where we do have an appropriation September for the new fiscal year. It's already, Congress already appropriated it. It's already approved. It's just a matter of 1 October. So it's not always subject to availability of funds. It can also be citing that new contract or that new appropriation for that new fiscal year. If I'm doing a contract for, let's say, construction, minor construction, and let's say it's only 1 million, can I use O&M funds for that? I have a minor construction project, 1 million. Can I use O&M funds, or do I have to get military construction funds to do it?
You can use O&M, I believe it's $1 million now.
Right, so based on the 2020 study guide, the limit is 2 million. So minor construction, 2 million or less, you can use O&M to fund it. What about procurement? Do I have to use procurement dollars if the item is only 150,000? Do I have to request procurement funding if what I'm trying to procure is only $150,000? And if not, what type of funding can I use? What type of appropriation?
You can use the OLA funds if it's less than 250.
You can use your O&M funds. Don't say OMA because OMA is only for the Army. So make sure you say O&M because you'll get mixed up when they throw it at you. All right, so yes, you can use O&M funds to procure items that's less than $250,000. Okay, let's figure out the life cycle of an appropriation. I'm going to use shipbuilding conversion Navy. So we said that shipbuilding conversion Navy is a multi-year, because it's more than 1 year for new obligations. How many years is a shipbuilding conversion Navy? That is good for new obligation? 5 years, right? All right, so if today is, what's today? April, now I'm gonna do November the 5th, 2012. You just received, so that date is November the 5th, 2012. You just received shipbuilding conversion Navy funds. When will these funds be closed? Let's see if you have enough information there. So I'm asking you when they will be closed. So remember, we operate in fiscal years. So what fiscal year will these funds be closed? So I'll give you all a few minutes. Okay, so today is November the 5th, 2012. You said 18? Did I hear someone say? Okay. Exactly. All right, so I'm gonna do it. So November the 5th, 2012, you do your calculation in your head, and I have to take it into an older year because on the exams, you're not gonna see 2022 and 2023 unless they do another update in a few years. So 2012, you're in FY13. Shipbuilding conversion Navy is a 5-year appropriation. So you gotta go, it's good for 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. So what was my question? What are the questions you're trying to answer? I asked, what was the question I asked? When the funds are closed, right? So remember, shipbuilding conversion Navy is 5-year appropriation. How long? What's the next phase after current? Expired. How long is the appropriation expired? Y'all getting quiet on me. There you go. There you go. FY23. So FY23 is when it's closed. I'm taking time with this because I also used to teach the PEEM course at Fort Jackson, and these type of problems always mixes people up. So you have to take it one step at a time. You will be given today's date. You will be told the type of appropriation, and based on the appropriation, you know if shipbuilding conversion is current for new obligation for 5 years, like military construction, is good for this particular example, FY 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. Then it enters, every appropriation enters the expired state for 5 years. So that means it's expired for 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And if the question for the exam happens to be what fiscal year is it closed, in this example, it is closed in FY23. Any question on what we just did? So don't forget that every appropriation stays in the expired state for an additional 5-year period. So that's kind of throws people sometimes. All right, so we got that. We talk about that. We talk about the budget authority. Oh, what does the word outlay mean? Occasionally I see that in the study guide. What does outlay mean? In your words, in your own, say again? Disbursements, right? So think of outlay is the official term for when the funds are dispersed or taken out or removed from the treasury to pay that bill, whatever that invoice is, that is an outlay. So be familiar with that term. If you identify an ADA violation and you know it's clear cut, that's an ADA violation, when are you required to report it to your higher command? How long after that?
24 hours?
Not that soon, but you got a little bit more time. But based on the 2020 study guide, it says you have to do it within 2 weeks of your discovery. You have to notify your hire. And how long do you have to complete the preliminary review? That means you've done after you discover it, you've done your investigation. How long do you have to do your investigation into the ADA violation? So you have 4 months from the date of initial discovery. So that's on your ADA violations. And if you identify it, you have 2 weeks and 4 months to complete the investigation. What does sequestration mean? Occasionally you hear that in the government. A few years ago, they always talk about sequestration. What does that mean? Repeat that again for me. Okay. Government layoff, sequestration. Okay. I could take that. What else? What is because it's when associated with funding, what does sequestration mean that we're doing with funds? So in essence, we do it in our organization. We might not call it sequestration, but when they have automatic cuts, when you get your new budget and they say, okay, it's going to be an automatic 10% cut, that is the sequestration, basically, at our level, from our level. But sequestration at the federal level is an automatic cut in federal spending that occurs through the withdrawal of funding for certain government programs. So it's taking money away from an approved, whatever Congress had approved for that particular program. If you are trying to make a purchase and you are not comfortable with it, you're not sure, what can you do to get additional advice? What can you do? You can get a review, so you can request advanced decision from your DOD general counsel, your lawyers, your JAG, your ethics lawyers. So you're asking for their legal advice on you making a purchase that you're not comfortable with. Exactly. And I will tell you, because we're going through a similar situation now where with what is it, UAC, unauthorized commitment even though you receive guidance from your ethics lawyers and they say, yeah, this is the right. But again, it's on the financial managers. That's why we are now professionals taking this CDFM, because we are an accountable individual. When you certify those funds, it still can fall back on us. So it doesn't elude, I would say, even at that point, it doesn't remove us from the equation. Let me put it that way. On other situations, like say the commander or the boss told you to do it, it's okay. But in our particular job, it doesn't matter if our supervisor said, yep, go ahead and do it. Whose name is going to be on that transaction in GFIPS, right? It's going to be yours or whatever system you use. All right, so what are the statutes of limitation when it comes to ADA violation? Let's stay there for a little bit. Statute of limitation. So let's say for error and then for fraud. So which one's no limit? Fraud, right? So if it has something to do with fraud, there's no statute of limitation. That means it could take them 10, 11, 20 years down the line. If they can prove that it was fraud, there's no statute of limitation. What is the statute of limitation for error? Let's say I fat fingered and I added an extra zero or whatever the error was. What's the statute of limitation on that one?
3 years.
It is 3 years, correct. All right, let's talk about the Feed and Forage Act, 41 US Code. Yes, you need to know it because I only see it in the study guide one time, but I always have people come back and say, hey, they asked something about a Feed and Forage Act. What is the Feed and Forage Act? 41 US Code 6301. What does it talk about? What does it allow the Department of Defense to do? Exactly, and make sure they're in a, so most likely it's in a deployed location. So it's not on an everyday basis. So kind of like, what is it, humanitarian assistance, when they go, when Haiti had the earthquake and you send people there, they can actually, they needed to spend when they got there. So Feed and Forage Act can kick in on those particular areas, meaning DOD doesn't currently have the authorization, but if they quote 41 US Code 6301, because it has to do with fuel, we need fuel for our vehicles, we need shelter, we need medical care, housing, you can use Feed and Forage Act 41 US Code. Let's switch gear. Let's talk about finance. What are the 4 functions of finance? First one is entitlement, right? Before you pay somebody, you want to make sure they are entitled. So you got to go through the entitlement process. Then once they're entitled, you identify that they are required or authorized to get payments, funding. So entitlement, payments. Then sometimes we owe the government money, so they have collection. And just like auditing, we have to have control of public funds. So the 4 functions of finance are entitlement, payments, collections, and control of public funds. EPCC. We like acronyms, right? EPCC, entitlement, payments, collections, and control of public funds. What is the 3rd function of finance? EPCC. What is the 3rd function of finance? Collection. So make sure if you know them in order, then they say which is the fourth function of finance, or they give you a list of which one is not a function of finance, because it's a multiple choice. So most likely it'll be, you'll have 4 choices and it'll say which one is not. Make sure you read your questions when they ask you on these exams, which one is not a function of finance. Then if they throw some extra word in there, you'll know if it's not entitlements, payments, collections, and control of public funds. You notice I keep repeating because repetition is what will help you to remember these things. How much leave days does a military member receive in a year? How many? 30? 30, okay, all right, just checking. All right, so 30 days, and the military is paid on what type of month? We got 28 days in 1 month, we got 31 days in 1 month, but the military is paid on how many days out of a month? What type of schedule? 30-day month. All right. Can the military sell back leave? And if so, what are they limited to? They can sell back up to 60 days. All right. And let's see, military officers, do they receive annual clothing allowance? Do they ever receive? Initially. Okay, so 400 is for the officers, that they receive a one-time stipend in the beginning and they don't get any more. Then the enlisted, they get annually based on whenever they came, their anniversary of when they joined the military. How many discretionary allotments can a military member have? Discretionary allotment, that means they get to pick which one they want to take out, what they want to come out. Go ahead. Up to 6 discretionary allotments. That's correct. Military members are governed under what title? What law? Title what? Title 10. DA civilians are covered under what title? Title 5. And the third one, National Guard are covered under what title? 12, not what I'm looking for. Try again. Title 32, that's the primary. So I'm not sure about 12, I know Title 32 for sure. So make sure you know those titles, because they come up quite frequently. All right, let's see, civilian pay. What rate are we paid on each year as civilians? Let me see what I'm trying to ask, make sure I'm asking it in the right fashion. How many pay periods do we have? Let me ask it that way. 26 pay period in the 52 weeks. Pay period, okay. How long are civilian pay records kept? $56 years. Don't ask me where they got that number from, but 56 years civilian pay records. Now, I'm one of those, okay, well, what happened to the military pay records? There's nothing in here that talks about it, so I'm gonna assume it's around the same, since we're talking about pay. Travel claims, since I deal with GTS and we still have people who don't know this. When you return from a TDY, how long do you have to settle your voucher before you start running into problems? 5 days, right? Within that 5 days after returning, you should be settling on completing your voucher. Permanent travel. If I'm coming from, let's say, Germany, Old Conus to Conus, who pays for my PCS? Old Conus, right? But typically, who pays? If I'm going between the continental United States, who pays the PCS? Are normally charged to the gaining. So, right, so it's the gaining activity. So the new organization typically pays for people if you stay within the continental United States. And the exception is when they go through different components from Old Conus to Conus, then that losing organization pays. So that's with your permanent duty travel. What does, and I know they don't go into much detail with the payment due date and so forth for Prompt Payment Act, but what does, let's see, 210 net 30? Who can tell me what that means? If on a contract it says 210 net 30, what does that mean? That's exactly correct. So whenever you're talking about Prompt Payment Act and you calculating the payment due date, and whenever on the document, if it says 210, 2/10 net 30, that means in that contract, you can take a 2% discount if you pay the bill within 10 days, or if it's over the 10 days, then you pay the full amount within that 30 days. So 210 net 30. What DoD agency is responsible for finance and accounting? That should be an easy one. DFAS, that's correct. What is the preferred payment method? What is the preferred payment method? Check, cash, e-commerce, EFT, electronic funds transfer, what? EFT, right? It's not a trick question. So the preferred disbursement method is electronic funds transfer, e-commerce process, right? We just put it in your bank account. Like back in the day, they used to just send us checks, and then checks get lost and people spill things on them. So let's since we're there talking about checks, let's say I receive a check from the government and I spill coffee all over it before I cash it. Does that mean that I'm out that money? What am I remedy?
You can get a new one issued.
Right, so I got to return that check and notify them that I couldn't cash it because it makes it non-negotiable because I distorted the check. And so because I'm still entitled to the check, they can reissue the same office that I got it from. I have to return it there. What is considered a major loss of fund? A major loss, $750 or more. That's considered a major loss of fund. if you are a dispersing officer, dispersing agent, is it better to be over balance, out of balance, break even? What is the scenario there when you're dealing with funding? You want to break even, right? Because I know we had cashiers deployed and oh, I got $10 over. No, that means you did something wrong, right? That's not a good thing. In other organizations, there might be, oh, that's a good thing. We made some extras, but with government funding, everything is always, let's try to break even. So being over is not a good thing in itself. How long do we keep personnel records? So we said that civilian payroll is 56 years. How long do we keep personnel records? Or transactions, let's put it that way. Any type of transaction completed. How long are those records kept for audit purposes? 10 years. And in the older study guide, I think it's what, 6 years and 3 months it used to be, if I remember correctly. So now it says 10 years. 10 years. So all your records should be kept for 10 years. Any question thus far? We're still moving along. All right. What are the types of DoD accounting? What type of federal accounting? You have budgetary accounting, proprietary or financial accounting, and managerial cost accounting. Y'all can still hear me? Because I know my phone's trying to ring. Okay, all right. I think I'll call back. Okay, let's see. I'm trying. All right, so budgetary accounting, what type of general ledger transactions, what number do they begin with? As I try to figure out what I want to add. Here we go. Budgetary accounting. On the general ledger, you have various lines of accounting data. They start from 1,000 to 8,000. For your budgetary transactions, what does the number start with? All budget, you're right, correct. All budgetary starts with a 4. What are the 3 types of federal financial statements that we're responsible for? So you have the balance sheet, the statement of net cost, and the statement of change in net position. How do we calculate the balance sheet? Because again, on the exam, they don't give you the formulas. You got to know it. So how do we calculate the balance sheet? What is the formula? So the balance sheet. Okay, assets equal. Did you say minus? Make sure I heard you correctly. So assets equal liabilities plus net position. So that means your left side of the balance sheet must equal the right side. My assets numbers start with a 1. My liability starts with 2. my net position starts with 3. So my 1,000 numbers equal 2,000 plus 3,000 numbers. So, and I'm saying numbers because they can give you a series of numbers. You have to know based on what it start with, you'll know, okay, this one's a liability. This one's an asset. This one's a net position. And then they might give you a bunch of those numbers and say, calculate the balance sheet. So you have to know, okay, everything that starts with a 1, I need to add all of those up. Everything equals everything that starts with a 2 plus everything that starts with a 3. And I'll know I'm right if the left side equals the right side. All right, how do I calculate the statement of net costs? What transaction lines do I need to look at? So the formula first, I have to know what the formula is. The formula is expenses minus exchange revenue, or expenses minus revenue equals the statement of net cost. My expense lines start with what number? So those are the ones that start with the 6,000, and my revenue starts with 5. So my 6,000 numbers minus my 5,000 numbers gives me my statement of net cost. So budgetary, proprietary, or financial, and managerial cost accounting. What is the formula for the current ratio? What is the difference between a current ratio and the quick ratio? So you could answer either one of those questions. What's the difference? Okay, so the quick ratio backs out, takes out, remove inventory. So the formula is cash plus accounts receivable plus inventory divided by current liability. That is a formula for current ratio. Quick ratio, I just remove the inventory. So here's my so what question. Current ratio, what does that tell me? What is a good current ratio? What's the DoD's goal for current ratio? So we want a current ratio 2-to-1 is what the DoD prefers, because a current ratio measures the entities or the organization's ability to meet its current obligation, their ability to pay their bill. So we want to have more coming in than going out, 2-to-1. Current liability is what we owe. So we want to have more cash, accounts receivable, inventory, 2-to-1. What about quick ratio? Quick ratio looks at our solvency, our ability to, let's say we have to get rid of the business real fast. How quickly can we do it? So a quick ratio of 1-to-1 is best. So 2-to-1 and 1-to-1. Switching gears on you, because that's how it's going to be on the exam. You're going to be talking about one subject and then they're going to be jumping to something else. What law required us to have auditable financial systems? What is the law that requires us to have auditable financial systems? That is the Chief Financial Officers Act of 1990, CFO Act of 1990. It's important because that's the reason we came out with GFIBs and whatever other systems the other services have. Auditability. The CFO Act also, so it was 3 things: that auditability, the CFO position, and a deputy director of OMB was established to be in charge of financial management. Always. What are, okay, so the we already discussed this, so I'm not gonna repeat it. So the generally accepted government auditing standards, the GAS, is also another name for the yellow book, GAO yellow book, the GAGAS, GAGAS. Generally accepted government auditing standards is another name for the GAO yellow book. What are the auditor standards? Yeah, the GAO standards for auditors. There's 4 of them. So you have auditor independence, because you don't want the person to be a part of your organization. You don't want to avoid biases. You want to avoid, hey, that's my supervisor, so I got to make sure everything looks favorable type of mindset. Auditor professional judgment, that's number 2. Auditor competence, they got to be trained. How much training does an auditor have to have every 2 years when it comes to continuing education? Don't faint on me yet. Stay with me. We almost done. Stay with me. GAO standards, auditor independence, auditor professional judgment, auditor competence, 80 hours every 2 years. They got to be continuously trained, just like you. Once you get your CDFM, you're going to have to complete 80 hours of CETs every 2 years and at least 20 hours in a year. So you can't just wait for the first year or the second year to do all 80. You got to do at least 20 in a year. And quality control and assurance. Quality control talks about that auditor organization being audited by another external organization. So how often does an audit organization has to be reviewed by an external peer? Anyone? How often?
3 years.
Every 3 years. That auditor has to have a peer review. And other auditing organization has to come in and review them to make sure that they are holding up standards. When the auditors come out to your organization, does everyone on that team have to be qualified in every single area that they're coming out to audit? No. Yeah, that's my question. When the team comes out to audit, does every member of the team have to be qualified to do any of the jobs that they come out to inspect? And the answer to that is no. Collectively, they have to have the qualification. So all the members on the team collectively have to be able to meet the qualification to come out to audit your organization. But no one person have to know everything that they come out to investigate. All right, so when they do audits on financial system, financial reporting, performance audit, and the third, what's the third one called? The third type of audit? That is the attestation engagement. Who can tell me what does attestation engagement mean?
Is it when you make the arrangement for the review?
That's correct. when you reach out to an auditor, an independent organization, and you tell them, hey, I want you to come look at our travel section, and I want you to come in and do an audit on this particular function. So attestation engagement allows you to tell the auditor what to come in to look for, versus the other two is the external organization telling you, like DFAS, hey, we're coming down on this date to inspect your operation. They might give you a checklist and tell you what area, but you have no control over it. Who can give me a list of different DoD auditing organizations?
Air Force, Army, Navy, can't think of it.
Right, so the Army does the Army, the Navy does the Navy, the Air Force does, all right, so we're skipping DoD. So who does the audit at DoD?
Defense contracting?
Good, but almost there. Defense contracting is another entity, but the DoD IG, Inspector General, is the primary for the DoD. So you have the DoD Inspector General, Army audit, Navy audit, Air Force audit, and you want to also add the Defense Contract Audit Agency, because they just particularly focus on contracts, versus the DoD IG is auditing in general, and the contracting folks just focus on contracts. Can auditors perform additional duties outside of just auditing organization? What else can they provide? So an auditor can also help not to do a formal audit, but they can help you establish methods, procedures. Because often when they come in and they have a finding, they will give you a recommendation. So that's kind of outside of what their job was, to come really and detect what's going on, but they also can provide insight, oversight. What are the phases of a government audit? Let's look at that. So we talk about actually coming out doing the audit, but what are the steps before that? What's that phase called? Planning, right? Don't they have to plan? Plan, review, report. So planning is determining what you're gonna look at, right? Because we can't look at everything. So you gotta pick certain areas. You gotta look at timeline. Who's gonna go out to do the audit? So planning, review, where you gather the evidence, you go out, you do your investigation, and then you do your reporting. So the three phases of an audit is plan, review, and report. And I would say follow up, because yeah, you might want to follow up, make sure that actions were taken. All right, on an audit report, there's several types of opinion that is listed. If you have, which one is the best? Without me giving you the list. Audit report, because I know if you don't have to do it, please know that your organization submits an audit report every year. They call it, what is it, statement of assurance, right? So you're either unmodified, which is the best, meaning everything you're doing, separation of duties, you have standard operating procedures, you have certifying officers in place. Modified, you have exceptions, disclaimer, unable to render an opinion or adverse. So part of that report that the auditor provides at the end, it'll tell you unmodified, modified, disclaimer, or adverse. You have a lot of material issues or weaknesses that needs to be corrected. What type of benefits can you get after completing an audit? What are some of the potential benefits? Or types, let's put it that way. What's some of the types of potential benefits? So benefits can either be monetary or non-monetary. So don't think too deep, because I notice y'all getting quiet, so that tells me you're thinking too deep into this. So at the end of the audit, what's the end result? I want to be able to be efficient, to be effective. So that means if I identify a discrepancy or deficiency and I correct the deficiency, well, the goal is I should have enhanced something, whether it's monetary or non-monetary. Okay, let me check out. All right, so I'm going to pause and see if you got any question for me. Let me try to look at some other notes I have here, make sure I didn't miss anything. This is module 3 and 4. Way too. No, looks like we went over. We hit all. All right, that's all I have, ladies and gentlemen. What questions? Give it. And even though we're going to be pausing for 2 weeks, please know you still can reach out to me. If you need a one-on-one, you want me to go over something, I'm still available to be able to assist you. Any question? All right, so again, my recommendation to you today concludes our review of CDFM Module 3. My recommendation is for you to pick a date within the next couple of weeks to schedule your exam, whether you go in person to an educational facility or you're doing it the at-home exam. Go ahead and schedule the test so that while the information is fresh, that you can go ahead and take the exam. Make sure you review what I email for those that are on my email list, that those notes, because the notes again will kind of help you to guide your studies. Also with module 3, working capital fund. Even though it's not discussed in details in the study guide in module 3, I've heard that there can be more questions asked with the working capital fund. So make sure you understand that process. All right, if you have no questions of me, that's all I have for today. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. If you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube page, please consider subscribing. It allows YouTube to promote our channel so that more people can find the videos as they're studying for the exam. Thank you for stopping by. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. You have a great day.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.